What you're about to listen to, some might call Fictron Episode 5. Others might call it a Halloween special, a Fictronomicon, if you will. Some may even call it the 1-year anniversary of Fictron. 5 episodes in 1 year, 6 if you count the pilot. But I'm afraid this is no cause for celebration. Codex, half book, half circuit board, beloved mascot of Fictron, has been cursed. And now he haunts this very audio, and I'm sorry to say, he now haunts you. The only way you may be free of his curse is to finish the episode and share it with 10 other people. I hope you can forgive me. I didn't want to, but I had no choice. So unless you want to remain cursed, then with great caution, let's get alternative.
Once upon a time our teacher said, "You'll never break the rules that we define." The times are changing now, let's look ahead. It's time for us to read between the lines.
Hey, what's up guys? My name is Bela Ogier, and my favorite creepypasta is Fettuccine Alfredo.
You're walking through the woods. You hear a noise, you turn to look. Turn back, it's gone. But out of the corner of your eye, you spot it. PDB.
And I'm Isabella Zardi, and I'm sorry to inform all of you, due to the internet's recent crackdown on language not suited for minors, we have come to the decision that we are renaming Jeff the Killer to Jeff the Unaliver.
A moment of silence for Jeff the Aliver.
Unaliver.
So, today we're going to be talking about creepypasta.
Yeah, spooky spaghetti.
Horrifying lasagna. So creepypasta are basically horror stories created in the context of an online space. So they're horror stories that are written and shared around the internet and passed around to others to read.
Yep, ghost stories.
And it was initially derived from the term copypasta. Now, a copypasta is a sort of chainmail type story, like a funny short little thing. You can find them on like 4chan threads or like Reddit and stuff like that.
Exactly, they even go back as far as back when people used email.
Or DeviantArt.
Well, DeviantArt has them too. The oldest ones in circulation began on email.
Yeah, that's true. I have like very vivid memories of being very caught up in chainmail when, and like borderline like obsessed with them because I would keep getting them, and I would be so like terrified that I would just like send them to everyone I knew, and it was always like this very psychotic like violent ones.
It's kind of the equivalent of those awful trite messages you'll see on Facebook of like, I'll bet that not 10 people will share this message about how they support like whatever I support, you know, or oh, I bet this many people won't respond to me, but I'm gonna repost it because I'm a good friend. Like those kind of messages that encourage you to spread it around like a virus.
Yeah, some of y'all need to hear this and it shows.
Yeah. Like unironically though. So copypasta are like basically funny kind of troll stories of this nature where they're meant to be shared around and passed around to people. And so creepypasta started out as versions of these stories, but with an emphasis on being creepy, scary, passed around for the purpose of scaring people.
Boo!
So in a sense, it has its roots in trolling. And trolling, of course, is something that's often seen as being kind of childish or mean-spirited.
Yeah, it's outside the bounds of normal, acceptable behavior. I don't know if I'd say it's such like trolling because a lot of it is narrative.
Narrative pranking.
Well, there's a sort of buy-in that you have to attract the reader before you can actually prank them.
It's like sort of like a higher level of trolling, really. It's not like base trolling of just...
Advanced trolling.
Yes, exactly. Advanced trolling. It's not just like you're calling someone a name. You're trying to scare someone by getting them invested in the story.
But trolling would be if it had an unsatisfying anticlimactic payoff for all that emotional investment. Isn't the point of trolling to waste people's time?
Well, I think it's also partially like the scaring is the waste of time because, like, especially if you're a kid and you're like seeing these messages and it's like you gotta repost these to like 15 of your friends, but you're like friendless and you don't have any, the creature's gonna come for you. So you like sit there and you're like waiting for it and then it just never happens.
Oh, yeah. Telling someone that you've pranked them so they go and look, but there was no prank, but that was the prank.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. Like Gullible on the ceiling.
And I don't agree really that the point of trolling is to waste someone's time. I think the point of trolling is to get a rise out of someone.
That
and
too.
what
Yeah.
better way to get a rise out of someone than by scaring them?
All right.
Exactly. True.
I would just tend to draw the distinction that a lot of creepypasta is story for its own sake.
I think that's what it evolved into.
Exactly.
Alright.
That's what it's become. But I do think that at its origins, it was sort of rooted in this kind of trolling idea of like wanting to get a rise out of someone.
I wasn't there when the old stuff was written. I'm a relative newcomer to creepypasta.
Yeah, I find it interesting though that, you know, trolling is kind of considered this asinine, childish thing to do, but like people have written some very, even like back in the day, you know, when this was a new thing and still very much had its roots in trolling, people wrote some pretty like interesting, inventive little creepypasta stories. Like Smile Dog, that's a pretty old one, which we'll go into in a bit, but it's just interesting to me that this whole thing of trolling, which is normally frowned upon, can be used in a more constructive way. You can channel that desire to want to get a rise out of someone into something more constructive and inventive.
Yeah, sure. The base element of the human experience is the story, so it makes sense that any communication would eventually tend towards storytelling.
Yeah. I also think that the idea of trolling is as old as humankind itself.
Oh, absolutely.
There have been trickster figures in mythology forever, right? In all cultures across the world. Like, we have this morbid fascination with messing with people.
Yeah, so many cultures have a trickster god who defies the bounds of normal behavior. And it's funny how often they get away with it.
And it's like you almost want to see them get away with it.
Yeah.
So even though creepypasta is about as broad a genre as you can get, I've sort of broken down 3 types of creepypasta that I think have really been the mainstays and the kinds that are like probably the most popular. So you have the creepypastas where a character visits a scary place. So they go to like a forbidden land or a haunted house, or they visit some dark, creepy part of town and scary things happen. There are the creepypastas about discovering a scary artifact, so some kind of device or trinket that has supernatural properties and like unforeseen terrible things ensue. And there are the creepypastas which are about encountering scary beings, so like creatures, monsters, right? Like Slender Man, Jeff the Killer. I feel like a lot of the most well-known creepypastas are the ones that are about encountering scary beings.
Oh, absolutely, because they put a face to the phenomenon.
Yes, and a lot of these faces have become like mascots of creepypasta, basically. The really famous ones have.
I think a lot of the more recent ones are expressly digital, and we see this extended into video games that play into meta elements and that have, characters who know that they're in a video game and, ooh, isn't that scary? I think a lot of that just stems from Missing No. Broken video game cartridges in general have weird errors, but Missing No is a remarkably coherent glitch, and the fact that it's an entity you encounter in such a specific ritualized way definitely, I think, it puts an origin to entity encounter as story in creepypasta.
And gaming creepypasta specifically, yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Because everything that follows after, hyper-realistic blood eye skeleton pops out of the cartridge that my college roommate programmed, or found at a thrift shop,
The like glitchy text.
Exactly. And Mario said the F word and my mom grounded me.
Tails materialized in real life as a doll and is chasing me now.
Exactly. Well, all of that, I think, Missing No is the earliest example one could attribute to lots of people finding separately, independently, and forming an undercurrent of mythos. It definitely plays into child lore, the kind that goes around playgrounds, that doesn't seem to trickle upwards to grown-ups as they age, but it's just continual generations of children teaching other children these weird legends.
Completely, and it's like sort of the joy of finding this one aspect that's in this game that you love and being like, oh, I want that to be in, like, every game I've ever had ever.
Now, Missing No was like a glitch in one of the Pokemon games, to clarify, right?
Yes, Missing No essentially arises as a lookup table error where you talk to a tutorial guy, and when you are the tutorial guy, when the game swaps out your player model for the tutorial guy's information, it overwrites certain sectors of memory, which it expects to go back into the next time you go into a battle. But if you fly specifically to a very specific point of the coastline of Cinnabar Island, which is way on the other side of the map, immediately after having this guy's info stored in that sector of data, it tries to load a Pokemon whose information doesn't exist. So Missing No. That's part of the reason why it takes 3 times as long for Missing No's picture to appear, because it's trying to call data that doesn't exist.
And what results on the screen visually is like this weird menagerie of glitches and pixels that doesn't look like anything.
Exactly, and yet it functions like a Pokemon. It has movesets, it has a type, it has a level, in addition to being able to duplicate the whatever item is in the 6th slot of your bag. So it actually has a functional purpose, which is why people started... Like, if it were purely a game-breaking bug, people would think it was, bad, but you can get items with it. So it actually turns into a mechanical advantage. And so the dumbest thing I see about this is people who are like, Game Freak should make Missing No canonical and add it to the latest game on purpose. It's like, no. The fun part about it is that it was completely unintentional.
Yeah, exactly.
The fun part about it is that it arises burbling up through the mythos of people encountering it independently by random chance, and then they talk about with their friends, and it's like, did you find this weird thing? It's like, I summoned a demon inside my game. Game Freak would just turn it into a regular, ordinary thing. It would be too mundane.
Yeah, like, the plushies, sort of, using it as... inevitable capitalist bait.
That would be fascinating, though, to have a plushie of, a glitched thing.
No, don't turn me into... Well, yeah, the stuffing would be leaking out.
Don't turn me into a marketable plushie. No!
No, I'm talking about, visually, I think that would be fascinating.
No, I know.
But if the plushie were glitching, then the stuffing would be leaking out.
I think I'm determined to find a way around that. I will get back to you.
Also, the other fun detail is that Missing No is 10 foot tall and weighs 3,500 pounds, incidentally. So it's like the size of a car.
he's just a big boy.
Exactly, yeah, but people always draw it as a mass of pixels. But I think, in universe, Pokemon are animals, right? So shouldn't it be, it looks to me like a giant slab of marbled steak.
Oh, you're not wrong.
Like, it would be made out of flesh, right?
Yes, this horrifying conglomeration of flesh.
It's an animal, it's a living creature.
I suppose, but isn't it found in sort of the oceany part? So I always attributed it to fish that mimic other things, like rocks.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah,
just a very fucked up tall flounder. Just
he's covered
out
in
there.
He's covered in barnacles. Yeah,
He's covered in barnacles.
But so with this idea of making it canon, right? It's like to an impressionable kid who's playing through the game for the first time, they're going to see it as canon regardless. They don't care whether it's canon or not. It's it's their experience. It's true for them.
Yeah, my perception decides what's part of the story and what isn't.
Exactly. So I sort of think it's kind of a moot point regardless, but I was thinking, though, about, similar things, because definitely I remember games that had glitches I would play online. When you mentioned that the other day, Peter, I was reminded of this SpongeBob movie game I used to play. There was, a 3D SpongeBob movie game, where you would drive around in the paddy wagon around Bikini Bottom doing mini-games. And there was this one part, I remember, where if you drove off the Thug Tug, which is, this bar-type setting, that's in a sunken ship, got a 45-degree angle, and so you can use it as a ramp and jump over the wall, over the boundary of the game itself, and land outside it. And when you do that, this error message pops up and the game closes. And yeah, I remember as a kid myself, I remember thinking of it as oh, that's fascinating. It's and I remember in my mind making that a part of the lore of this game.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that. I love when people make accidental properties of interactive media actually count as part of the story in their mind and their experience.
Yeah, precisely. I definitely feel like the same problem would occur with Missing No if they had put it into the Detective Pikachu movie, as happened with, and we'll get to it later, but Slender Man when it was turned into an actual Hollywood movie.
Yeah. It's also like, it reminds me too of, it's not a quite perfect parallel, but it reminds me of when, like in Toy Story, the toys had like Andy's name written on their feet. And now when they like sell actual Toy Story merchandise, they include Andy's name written on the foot of them like already. And I'm like, that defeats the whole point. Like, you're missing the point that was Andy's toys. It's like, so
now
okay.
I gotta scratch it out. Now I gotta add my name.
Exactly.
It's such a
like,
hassle.
It's exactly, it like ruins the fun of it in a way. Definitely, though, I would consider video game creepypasta and like lost media creepypasta, which are creepypastas about, lost episode of this show or some terrifying, obscene, creepy stuff happens, and I found a copy of this episode and watched it. And, you'll have one of these, at least one of these, for like pretty much every moderately popular show out there.
Yeah, it's as common as "it was all just a dream" theories.
Yes. I feel like those are classified under the discovering a scary artifact category of creepypasta, right? Like whether it's a haunted game cartridge or a lost episode, or I guess you could also say it counts as encounters with scary beings if it's like missing no, because some of them are hybrids, some of them are like combinations of these different categories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. A haunted video game cartridge kind of satisfies all three, usually, because the video game setting is the place, the cartridge is the artifact, and then it usually has an entity within it. But it serves to provide a level of separation between the real and the fictional, because it's contained within the cartridge.
Yes.
Genie in a bottle.
I guess that's why I would consider it artifact category before the other two, personally. Mm-hmm. And so I think that the scary artifact type of creepypasta is the one that's sort of changed and evolved the most since like the earlier days. I feel like that's the one that's expanded the most above them all, with like these sort of sub-genres of lost media, video games, and like these other kinds of digital-oriented creepypastas, right?
Yeah.
Like Smile Dog, for example, which I mentioned earlier, is a creepypasta about a cursed photograph. And this is back when the term cursed actually meant something. It wasn't just the term used to describe something that made you moderately uncomfortable, like, oh, this image is so cursed or whatever.
Back in my day.
Spooktacular used to mean something in this country.
Back in my day. Exactly. And so, yeah, so a cursed image meant like...
genuinely cursed. Like actually haunted.
Yes, literally haunted with like evil magic.
Containing a psychic effect or something, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the creepypasta Smile Dog is a story about this journalist doing research into this alleged haunted JPEG photograph of a dog with some beckoning hands in the corner, and the dog has these evil like human teeth and it's smiling. And it's said to cause people to go insane unless they pass the photo on to others.
That you're like also forced to look at because the creepypasta comes with the image. So then you are inserted into the story and then you have to like send it to somebody.
Immersion, yeah. It's got a narrative justification for the mechanic of passing it along.
And a lot of creepypastas, I think, like, the key with them are, like, they try to include the reader in this way. And I think that's a pretty defining thing for the genre as a whole.
Absolutely. Creepypastas are always written with this sort of sense of, like, oh, it's actually real. It's like they're almost presented as ARGs in a sense, except you can't actually...
interact with them, really.
Yes, you can't really interact with them. It's more just like, this is a thing that really happened. This isn't fiction, and now it's going to happen to you, is like a very common creepypasta thing.
Until you get to, like, Everyman Hybrid, which then is creepypasta and ARG, and currently finished.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Smile Dog is just an ARG with only one step.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of creepypastas are like ARGs with one step. And so Smile Dog ends with the journalist basically saying, I'm going crazy, I can't take it anymore, I'm going to post the image myself so that other people will see it and I'll stop going crazy, which makes me wonder, it's like, wouldn't that mean that, like, by the end of it, you would have roughly half the population go crazy because there'd be no one else to show it to?
Well, does the effect get diluted the more people see it simultaneously? Like, what happens if you upload the Ring video to YouTube?
Yeah, well, exactly. I don't know. It doesn't answer that question.
Samara can't come out of everyone's monitor at once.
Yeah.
What's the horror movie I saw recently that was like exactly the opposite of it?
What, going into the video?
No, like, basically the more that these people spread this message and the more, like, it's around, the stronger that demon of misfortune is.
Okay, so it's more like Uzumaki by Junji Ito.
I guess so, yes.
Okay. Man and girl go out to drive under moonlight. They stop at a side of road. He turned to his girl and say, "Baby, I love you very much." "What is it, honey?" "Our car is broken down. I think the engine is broken. He'll walk and get some more fuel." "Okay, he'll stay here and look after our stereo. There have been news reports of stereos being stolen." "Good idea. Keep the doors locked no matter what. I love you, sweaty." So the guy left to go get fuel for the car. After 2 hours, the girls say, "Where is my baby? He was supposed to be back by now." Then the girl hears a scratching sound. And voice say, "Let me in." The girl doesn't do it, and then after a while, she goes to sleep. The next morning, she wakes up and finds her boyfriend still not there. She gets out to check, and man door, hand hook car door.
Oh, I should say too, another example of a creepypasta that is without a doubt an ARG as well. Ben Drowned, which is not one I've read, but that's a creepypasta about a person finding a supposedly haunted cartridge of Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask and finding like some unsettling stuff within the game.
Yes.
And that one actually is, like, to my understanding, people have been able to interact with it, and I think it's still going on to this day. Like, God, it gets updates like once in a while.
I remember my little brother used to really enjoy the Ben Drowned one in particular. I've seen lately with the rise of making it indie game development software that makes it easier to make your own games, of course. There's people who actually execute on these ideas and make a haunted version of a classic game or something. And, like the, what was it, the Wario video editor or something, where if you cheat or reset the game in some Mario game, Wario puts you in a jail. It's like big and scary. It's like, it's like an anti-piracy type of thing. So it's like if you pirated the game, you don't get to play. You just get the big scary thing happens.
Evil Rossetti.
Exactly,
Oh,
basically.
yeah.
I've seen a bunch of these edits online, and it's like, there's nothing stopping someone from actually doing this in an actual indie game. And true to form, there's at least one game I've seen called There Are Zero Players Online, which I highly recommend, by the way. It's pretty clever. But it takes the guise of an old, abandoned online FPS game, like Capture the Flag type of thing, but it's haunted.
Ooh, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I mean, even though it wasn't actually built as a real playable game prototype for people to interact with, Petscop was certainly like presented like that too, like a haunted
yes.
video game that this one guy had encountered.
I have never paid attention to Petscop at all. I don't know what this is.
Petscop is fantastic. I highly recommend it. It's really haunting is how I would describe it. And it's like that doesn't quite really answer all the questions it presents, but there's a lot of like very kind of genuinely unnerving moments like around the game and around just sort of what happens to the character playing it, Paul, as he's called in the videos. It's presented as an unreleased PlayStation 1 game.
So it's just videos?
Yes, it's just videos. It's like a Let's Play series.
A Let's Play series of a game that doesn't exist, technically.
Yes, a fictional Let's Play series of a game that doesn't
Which
actually
is a
exist.
fantastic concept, and there should be more of those. Have
Yes.
It does kind of remind me of the game Mortis. I forget who that's by.
Oh,
but Mortis.
Hang
Have you
on.
played Mortis?
I love Mortis, yes. I believe it's Airdorf Games.
Airdorf, yeah, good games. I love the rotoscoped pixel art. It's a clever effect.
It's wonderful. It's everything to me. It's
rotoscope
beautiful.
pixel art sounds amazing.
Chef's kiss. Mwah. Beautiful game. Love it.
A lot of creepypastas are characteristic of having twist endings.
Yes, they
Oh,
are.
yes. Very, very much so.
Especially if your goal is sort of to get a rise out of people, then it's like, what better way to do that than with some kind of big twist? And if you read enough creepypasta, it starts to become kind of passé and expected.
Very, like, formulaic.
Yeah, it
Yep.
stops being genuinely scary after a fairly short while. You know, I got really into creepypasta like around late high school, early college, and they were like genuinely really scary to me, and I like really liked them, and there were a few that like actually kept me up at night. Like I was like so paralyzed by
Which
them.
ones? Which ones?
The creepypasta that's I remember scaring me the most at the time, more than any, was a creepypasta called Surveillance. I don't know why it scared me so much, because looking back, it has not scared me nearly as much, like rereading it. But Surveillance is a creepypasta about a guy who's like at home alone, and he turns on the security camera footage from outside his house, and it like shows on the screen by mistake, and he sees like a second later he sees like a scary figure standing in the distance, and then he looks out the window and sees him there, and he's like, oh, what the hell, right? Like, what's going on? And it spends a lot of time with him like freaking out and just worrying what's gonna happen. And then he hasn't moved on the screen in a long while, and he looks out the window again, and he's not there, and it turns out that the footage has been frozen for like an hour and not showing where he went.
Ooh.
And that part is what really scared me. Like, I had to stop listening to it for a while. I was so scared.
Wow.
I don't know why it scared me so much, but I just found it so... It just felt like such a haunting realization. Like, where is he now?
Yeah. There don't seem to be many creepypastas that hit a sort of existential dread compared to a more visceral or carnal dread.
Yes.
Like, a lot of them are very much about, like, scary thing rather than scary idea.
I would say the Russian sleep experiment is one of the exceptions to that. Definitely, like, more emphasis on the I mean, there's definitely the carnal, like, kind of just visceral, gross-out type of horror in that as well, but the note it ends on is, like, this sort of haunting existential thought. The Russian sleep experiment, by the way, is a fantastic creepypasta that I don't know if it would really fit in. I guess I would classify it as, like...
As place, right?
Yeah, as place is probably the closest it would be, because it's about a bunch of prisoners who are trapped and deprived of sleep by, like, a special chemical that keeps them from falling asleep, and they gradually become insane. But yeah, it's a very fascinating story, though.
I remember not being, like, particularly into it. It was more along the lines of, I just don't think human beings would do this, and being, like, completely disillusioned by it.
I have never read it because, having seen the title, I thought it was a real event akin to the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it pulls from, which also is, like, completely biased and not accurate.
Oh, yeah. This collection of, like, 10 guys are representative of the human condition under duress. Totally.
Definitely it tries to make itself look real, again, as many of these stories do. And so, like, the note it ends on, though, it basically implies that this insanity, this inner evil that came out of these people deprived of sleep is, like, something that is sleeping in all human minds, and that if anyone is deprived of sleep, this will happen to them.
Yeah.
The seed of evil that lurks in the heart of mankind.
And I grew up with insomnia, so I was like, that's bullshit.
Yeah, it cuts through the heart of every one of us.
Yeah, of course.
Maybe that's why I threw chairs at people in middle school, but who knows? But I do have a fun thing about the Russian sleep experiment. If, like, anybody listening to this has TikTok, you've probably seen it already.
Oh, yeah.
But a lot of the appeal of the Russian sleep experiment, I feel like, is the picture that is used to go along with it, which is just this, like, really just messed up looking guy. Not having like, bald, huge teeth, huge eyes, completely, like, sunken in, skeletal, and, like, the straight jacket. Black and white photo, like, completely looks like it's from the time period, which I think was, like, 80s-ish? A little bit before is when the story was supposed to be set. It looks very vintage, but this person on TikTok named The Hazardous Hooligan, I'm not sure if they're, like, real name, but that's the handle they go by. They found this animatronic from around 2009 called Spasm, which was just, like, a horror animatronic, and it's just exactly that picture. It's what they used. No editing.
So the photo is a picture of the animatronic?
Yes, basically. And you, like, tap it and it, like, shakes, and it admittedly very creepy, but, like, it's very rare, so, like, I guess not a lot of people have these, but it is a well-known prop. And it is very fantastic. It's very convincing.
It is fascinating to me. Like, a lot of creepypastas, especially like the more popular ones, have, if it's not like a mascot, like something that puts a face to it, it's still like an image, like a
Yes.
haunting image that comes to be associated with that specific creepypasta.
An image of a scary thing becomes the scary thing itself.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's kind of cool to like find the origins of these and sort of like, because I know people who have had nightmares like for years about this goddamn Russian sleep experiment, like gremlin thing. And it's
Yeah,
just,
he's all like bandaged and stuff, huh?
yeah. He's just like all put up in a little straitjacket. So it looks like a medical person, but he's not.
It's kind of like the SCP-173 statue, which, you know, SCP we're not going to get into because that really warrants its own entire episode.
That's for next year.
Yeah, maybe next year.
Ooh.
It's a collaborative horror writing.
Which began as creepypasta, yes.
Yes. And so SCP-173, the original creature from this collaborative project, though, that sculpture is like actually, that's a real sculpture, like made by like a Japanese sculptor. I'll
Yes.
put his name on the screen. I don't remember it at the moment, but I just found that fascinating that like you could hypothetically go and see, you know, SCP-173, Peanut, as he's sometimes called, in real life. And I love that.
Dun 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 dun. Ah, football head. Wait, no, that's Hey Arnold. I was thinking of kicking the football. Yes, the Peanuts music, yeah.
Oh my god.
It was, from what I recall, that artist is not particularly happy about the reuse of his work, but he can't really do anything about it.
I wouldn't be. It seems like such a genuine sculpture. I love it.
Yeah, it's a cool sculpture.
Oh, and I never finished talking about when I was in high school and early college, I was genuinely scared by these stories. But then, like, after maybe a year or two of reading a lot of them intently, they started to not be so scary anymore. And maybe that just happens with horror in general, but I feel like creepypasta in particular has become kind of one note.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think there's a certain level to the consumability of like creepypasta and like what people come to expect from the stories. And that's why they get sort of popular, are these sort of iconic characters that you come to expect the behavior of these characters. Like almost like kind of in the Tumblr sexy man way, not entirely, but like kind of. And sort of just like the notes that are expected to hit in the story, even if they're not like particularly like good plots. People know what they're getting into and they like seek it out in these, and like that's sort of what they want to read, I guess. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's definitely more bad creepypasta than good creepypasta, and a lot of the like famous ones are considerably bad, but like a lot of the bad ones are still fun to read, like even like to this day.
Yeah, exactly. Like they definitely have their like value in being what they are.
God, like Jeff the Killer, which is one of the most famous creepypastas, mostly because of the image associated with it. Again, those images really are powerful things. They do a lot for these creepypastas to like thrust them into fame.
Especially
right?
Like back in like the early internet, they were like very they were a lot scarier than they are now, because people are a lot more versed in editing photos and like just having these things on hand that can create these horrors.
Yes, there was more of a sense of like, what if it is an actual real image back then?
Yeah.
But so Jeff the Killer, which is one of the most famous, well-known creepypastas, is trash. It is a awful, terribly written creepypasta, but because of how haunting that image is, even though it's a fairly simple image, it has really stuck around and become like one of the namesakes of creepypasta.
And Jeff the Killer, for like people who don't know, like just a brief synopsis, is this kid who's like mega bullied at his school with his brother. He gets into like a bunch of altercations with these sort of like skater, very stereotypical like gangster type characters, which is problematic. And then gets like into like this fight at a birthday party, and then he gets like bleach thrown on him. There's like predispositions of schizophrenia that this kid has. Eventually, like during this altercation at this party where he's essentially burned, he like snaps and kills all these kids that are like hurting him, and then like his brain is like permanently broken. He goes back to his house, like carves like a smile on his face, winds up like I'm pretty sure killing his brother and the rest of his family, and then he like just becomes a serial killer, basically.
So his brain is overloading and it has a chocolate coating, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
But so with we can't forget too that like in the fire, his eyelids were burned off, which I don't think that's a thing that happens when people their faces catch on fire.
I think he did that himself, if I recall correctly.
We'll have to reread it. And then the skin, his skin was bleached white like forever. So he's got like black hair. These like
it's like a Joker origin.
And then is very like again Tumblr sexy manized into like this like tall, pale, like emo hair kind of guy.
Like MySpace scene kid.
One slur.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Any chance, go to sleep.
Go to sleep.
Like says
Yeah,
that
that's
when
the
he's
main
killing
thing.
people.
How could I forget that? What a blasphemy of me.
It's interesting, like, for all the creepypasta characters from stories that have, like, these very sort of haunting faces, probably, I would say the most famous figure from creepypasta is Slender Man. And Slender Man is, like, a tall, lanky, humanoid being with, like, in, like, a black suit and just a completely blank white face who, like, stands hauntingly off in the distance and has, like, black tendrils coming from his back. And there was a very popular video game made of him where you would collect 8 pages in the woods before he could catch you. And it's interesting to me that the creepypasta character who would arguably become the most famous and well-known one is the one with the least facial detail. So Slender Man has had quite the coverage, I would say, above all other creepypasta figures. Peter, you brought up that he even got a movie.
Well, Slender Man began as the product of a Photoshop contest for creating spooky photos on the forum Something Awful, in I believe 2008, created by a guy named Victor Surge. And I don't think that's his birth name, but if it were, it would be the most baller superpowered name that there exists. And it did generate a lot of internet fan lore. There was the Marble Hornets series, which is a YouTube original fiction, I guess it would be, wouldn't it?
I think it was an ARG.
In a sense, yeah, and they had the, I know there's stuff about the Operator, and there have been many different Slender Man games. And eventually, Victor Surge sold the rights to a movie studio, and I recall finding out about this because some Slender Man game that I was looking at got taken down. And it's like, now someone else owns the copyright. Now it no longer belongs to the internet. Now it's like in some ivory tower guy's hands. Now it belongs to one person. It's like, that's not fair. That's not real. That's made up bullshit. Like, it is a product of the internet no matter what.
Yeah, it is worth mentioning, though, that Slender Man, while arguably the biggest creepypasta figure, there wasn't initially, like, a centralized story surrounding him. It was originally just images.
Exactly. It was just a bunch of photoshopped pictures of this tall, lanky guy in the background of old photos. It is interesting how this ghost story arose collectively, rather than being from one central authority on the figure. It sort of emerged just from people making up stories about the photos until one was captivating enough to stick. Yeah, I tend to think of Slender Man as sort of a figure akin to... It seems to fill the same sort of mythological niche as, say, the Grim Reaper or a Wendigo, or more generally the sort of bogeyman who snatches children. Both of those previous two are sort of skeletal tall figures.
And you're seeing new kind of with like Siren Head. Like, yeah, Siren Head is a character very much inspired by Slender Man. He's like a tall, fleshy, lanky creature with, you guessed it, a siren on his head, and he makes spoopy noises at you.
Yeah, very loud, spoopy noises.
Wasn't it also, like, originally a similar sort of deal with, like, just, it was design of a character, yeah?
Just a picture, basically. Yeah, Trevor Henderson. He does a lot of cool monster designs. You should check out his stuff.
Oh, yes! I didn't even realize that was specifically him.
He makes all these really haunting photo edits of, like, putting monsters into, like, low-quality kind of pictures to make it look more genuine.
Yeah, the flash is the only piece of light in the photo.
That's originally, like, why I followed him. I didn't even realize he had anything to do with the Siren Head stuff. That's very interesting. I love that.
The photos he creates, I would say, definitely hit the same note as, like, creepypasta images do.
Yeah, I don't know if it's even right to describe Siren Head as being solely inspired by Slender Man, because it seems like the fact that it succeeded was on the basis of it resembling Slender Man, not because he intended it to be a copycat.
Oh, well, sure.
Definitely.
Yeah, who knows what he was thinking to come up with that monstrosity, yeah.
Well, he's just throwing stuff at the wall, and one of these things happened to stick.
It's true. He creates a bunch of these monsters, and Siren Head happened to be the one that, like, broke off and got really popular.
Here's the piece of text that was originally associated with it. It connects the idea of, like, oh, this big, tall, fictional creature, 12 meters tall, combined with the analog horror you find in a radio numbers station.
Yes, very true. And I think there's like a very significant through line in the designs of these like very, very popular creatures. Like specifically for Siren Head, Slenderman and the Rake is these like very like obscenely tall, lanky, like arms way too long, sort of
Wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube being.
yes, and like just like pale naked. It's all sort of just like corpse-like.
It feels a strange, niche within the human psychology.
It's very simple, but it's very like, oh, you look at that and that's immediately a corpse and something is very wrong with it. Even if it doesn't have like any truly identifying like factors necessarily.
There's something about it that sleeps within the base of the human brain, kind of like...
yeah, that automatically goes, oh, that's wrong. So I'm going to leave that be.
It's the same sort of archaic mythology as, say, maybe elves are a memory of Neanderthals or something.
It is remarkable how little it takes to, like, how little you really need to create an image that is unsettling to the human psyche. Like like the video game I'm Scared, which is like a very interesting like little experimental video game. The antagonist is called Whiteface, and it's literally just a haunting smile with two like black eyes on a face. That's all it is, but it's very scary. It looks very scary for what it is.
Or there's Discover My Body by Yames here.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
Love this one. I love this
Yeah.
one. And this one is about, a medical examination while some kind of parasitic organism is taking over you.
I said something yesterday, like, basically along these same lines about Smile Dog 2, which is, like, all, like, even the animals, like, and the, like, unsettling just sort of creatures all sort of converge into, like, there be, like, resembling a skull.
Yeah, a lot of these basically converge towards the skull, the fear of death itself, from many different angles, just as so many cartoon characters undergo a continual process of neotenization, of becoming mathematically cute, so that they all converge to the sort of baby-like form. Mickey Mouse, for example, has gone through this process. A lot of cartoon characters in general, generally over time, they get larger eyes relative. Yeah, Garfield has gotten more baby-like over time, more neotenous. His eyes have become larger relative to his head. His proportions have become more emphatic of the head. It seems to me that just as there is a Platonic ideal of cuteness sleeping within the human psyche, there is also a Platonic ideal of a corpse or something that is death incarnate. And all of these figures, in their own way, approach it at various angles.
And
Absolutely.
And it's definitely like the most natural thing to lean on when creating something creepy for the internet.
Exactly. You've got to have your own distinct twist on it. Like Siren Head combines the corpse with the number station. Slenderman seems to be more about like stranger danger, if anything. Because he's in a suit and tie. He's wearing black tie formals. So if anything, he's like, the Men in Black come to snatch you away.
Yes, exactly. And the Rake is just like more of this like feral sort of reaping creature. So it's definitely like more animalistic and sort of like it will get you violence sort of thing.
A lot of creepypastas, like, in the same way that these monsters, like, sort of all tend to converge towards the same kind of general look of death incarnate, as you put it, you also find, like, a lot of creepypastas converging towards sort of similar kind of tropes and writing styles.
Yeah.
Or, like,
Yes.
frequently used terms like hyper-realistic is a term that is so
Constantly.
overused, right?
To like meme status.
Well, it's meant to communicate medium breaking. It's like in a pixel art video game, suddenly you see a photorealistic image. It's like, okay, something's going on here that the game mechanics alone can't account for.
Right, exactly. But that term specifically has been like used and overused so much.
Yes, it has.
Like even I feel like the pacing of creepypastas, like I feel like a lot of them spend too much time in some areas and not enough time in others. Like, oh god, like Ted the Cave. Have you guys read Ted the Caver?
No, I haven't.
That's one of the longest, most tedious, boring creepypastas, and it's because it focuses so much on like monotonous things. It's like in the format of diary entry, so it's like an epistolary. It's a story about this guy and his friend like finding like a little tiny hole in a cave and trying to get through it by like carving it out or something. And so,
Oh, I think I have read this.
yeah, and so he describes meticulously all this stuff about like how like, oh, and tonight we ate this for dinner or like something like that, right? And what makes it even like more frustrating is that the story opens by saying something like, you know, it's been edited down to like the relevant parts, but has it though?
And that is not relevant at all.
I have a relevant example, which is The Nightland by William Hope Hodgson. This is one of my favorite stories of all time. The blurb on the back of the book here says that even Lovecraft called it one of the most macabre works of fiction that has ever been written. And if Lovecraft is calling something macabre, you gotta know it's the real deal. So it is incredibly rich and detailed. It was written at a time when they didn't know about nuclear fusion, so they didn't know what was powering the sun. So their estimates for how long the sun would remain burning were like 1,000,000 years. So this book is written, it's set in a time period long after the sun is burned out, and the last few million humans remaining live in a gigantic metal pyramid at the bottom of a dried-up oceanic deep-sea vent. Assailed on all sides by horrific extra-dimensional monsters, the only thing protecting them is an earth current, which is like a force field powered by geothermal energy. And the whole story is basically a knight in shining armor who's wielding a saw blade, a radial saw blade on a stick powered by the human soul, going out into the Nightland, which is completely dark except for fire from the landscape, to rescue a damsel in distress, but as if it were to take place at in the Sea of Monsters from Yellow Submarine. It is a fascinating and haunting book. It is so good. It's also written in this disgustingly flowery Victorian style that is even anachronistic for the time period in which it was written. And I can't even begin to count how many times the writer says, oh, and I took 2 of the food tablets and I'd had a sip of water, to say, you know, like, oh, they have food in pill form now in the distant future of 15 million AD. It's like, yeah, it does get repetitive.
Like you only need to hear that once.
Yeah, exactly. And so, of course, he did actually release an edited down version, which is like 1/10 as long, but that was just to secure copyright in the US. Yeah, no, it's such a good story. But, like, the audiobook is, like, 17 or 22 hours long.
Oh my god.
That's like how the Diamond Age felt to me. Like, it was a cool premise, but it was just awful writing.
The Nightland album by Kevin Bryce freaking rules, though, so you should check that one out. It's an album inspired by the book. But Diamond Age... Oh, Neil Stephenson.
I hate that book. It's so dense and with, like, unneeded detail.
Yeah.
Meticulous detail. But it's a cool idea, but...
Yeah, I loved Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, but I just couldn't get into Diamond Age from, like, the first chapter.
Yeah, I think I read through, like, maybe 10 chapters of it. I couldn't. We've talked a lot about some specific creepypastas and, like, the sort of history of them, the context of them existing as horror stories on the internet meant to be shared as sort of, like... Oftentimes they're cited as the campfire stories of the internet.
Yes.
Let's talk a little about how the actual creepypasta community has been shaped. So, firstly, I want to just bring up that there's a fairly big YouTube sphere of narrators, creepypasta narrators, people who make their YouTube living by finding creepypasta stories online and narrating them to audiences for you to listen to them rather than read them, like audiobooks, right?
Yeah.
It's become huge, right? I think, just speaking for myself, I think I've probably listened to more creepypastas than read them because the narrators just give such an interesting spin on them, you know?
Absolutely. Yes. And when I was growing up, like, even, like, all throughout middle school, they were almost the only thing I would interact with online. Like, it would be all that I would listen to was just, like, these horror stories. Especially from, well, like, obviously the most sort of famous one being Mr. Creepypasta, because, like, duh, the name.
Yeah. My favorite was always Creeps McPasta. He was always my favorite.
It's a great name.
British guy.
Yeah.
It's cool how two different narrators can tell the same story and make it almost completely different.
Exactly. Excerpt of No End House by Brian Russell, as read by Mr. Creepypasta.
I closed the door behind me. My eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone.
As read by CREEPYPASTA.
I closed the door behind me. My eyes held shut and my ears ringing. The hum was surrounding me. As the door clicked into place, the hum was gone.
I think there's a parallel to be drawn with Let's Players, how like a Let's Player will, as a Let's Player is playing through a video game, even though it's the same game, like the way they engage with it is different, and they might have like inside jokes amongst their own community that arise from them playing it. Like when Markiplier played this one Amnesia custom story called A Late Night Drink, and gave rise to, he found a tiny little crate in the hallway on the first episode and named it Tiny Box Tim and acted like it was a real creature coming along with him, like a pet. And Tiny Box Tim became like a whole thing in like in the sphere of like Markiplier lore.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the bigger Let's Players tend to have that. They'll create a companion for the playthrough.
Yeah, it seems like it's sort of like you have the lore of the game, or like you have the like its own individual lore, but then mixed with that you have this sort of continued lore of the Let's Player or the narrator, carried over from previous like episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like you have two stories that are like perpendicularly intersecting each other.
The complex plane.
Exactly. It's like 2D storytelling.
Damn, I hate how much legroom I have on the complex plane. It always folds my legs into the fourth dimension.
But so I think both of these things too, like Let's Players and creepypasta narrators, really anyone sort of engaging with a story and like showcasing their engagement with the story, I feel like all of that has a parallel to be drawn with like a parent reading their kid a bedtime story. The way that like when you're reading a bedtime story, you will like sort of make sound effects maybe, or like do a certain voice for certain characters, add your own spin on it, and it makes it really like quite literally, I think, a different story to the person experiencing it.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely. Perception is everything here. Yeah.
And in a funny, like, quite literal way, there are, like, 24-hour live streams of these narrations that, like, are specifically advertised as, like, sleep aids.
That's so funny.
I know, it's crazy how many people listen to creepypastas to fall asleep. It's amazing.
Is it anything like those channels where it's like hypnosis to get longer legs or to get longer hair or something?
No.
Not
It's
even
just
like
like
that?
I mean, I'm sure there are some that are like
yeah,
that.
Creeps Make Pasta has this on his channel where like even though he uploads videos like on the regular of just reading specific stories, he also just has a constant 24/7 live stream of like of stories he's narrated, and it's just like a playlist of like narration after narration.
Yeah, it's just like nonstop of the stories.
Well, because I was thinking that might actually make a good basis for a story. There's a Ray Bradbury story, I think, a short story by Ray Bradbury, where he, it's about a guy who gets his skeleton removed or something, which is a horrifying concept in its own right. But I was thinking, like, there's all these hypnosis videos where the goal is to, like, improve your appearance or something, but a lot of them are contradicting each other. So what if you listen to 10 of them at once? It's I want longer fingers and shorter fingers, and I want shinier teeth, and like, and a wider face. It's like, it mutates you, like the Enigma of Amigara Fault. That would be a fun concept for a story.
This is the story of a day where there was all this blood. A man was walking around, and blood started coming out of him everywhere. There was so much blood that it filled up an elevator. He went to the store and there was just blood all over the place. People were slipping in it, and they were all grossed out. He tried to go swimming, and all of the sharks went nuts and bite-end everybody. He got chased by all the vampires ever. One time the blood got a kid and a dog. At the end of the day, everyone decided they would send him to space so that he would stop getting blood everywhere. The scariest part is that the man was you. Or he was a lady if you are a lady. And you forgot that this happened.
Why are so few of the creepypasta figures female? Huh?
Exactly. It's sexism.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We need more female representation in horrifying monsters that rip your face off.
No, literally.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
like I have no, this is something I talked about like very regularly, and I think with Bela as well. Like there's like
Yeah.
a very specific like way that these stories mainly play out, especially in the entity category, where the general plot is that you are just like this. The protagonist is just like this random like either like late teens, like early 20s, like just random white man. That is like his life is like pretty much normal until it's not.
The internet's everyman.
The internet's everyone. It's
The
like
generic insert because it's the most likely person to be reading it, right? Although, frankly, I would have thought there is more of female readership because it seems to me to have the same appeal as true crime.
there is more female readership, and there is like a gigantic amount of queer readership, which like makes it like a little bit more strange. I guess that there's something to be said about like writing stuff that like mimics what you know, or like what other horror stories have produced in the past that like are often hinging on like just like white men whose lives are normal until they're not, and then using that and not really coming up with like very original female characters. And then the ones they do create, especially if they're like the entity that is harming stuff, they're like very like stereotypical. Like for Sally, which I think is just like a kid that got like preyed on and then murdered and then came back as a ghost for like vengeance. It's just like this little girl, very stereotypical like little girl who isn't actually like written like a little girl, just like the grown man's version. How a grown man thinks a little child would talk, basically.
So, I'm thinking about how, like, Amy Rose in Sonic the Hedgehog, her personality is just girl.
Yeah. It's pretty much
it's
that.
just flat and nothing else.
That is like a solid chunk of how like women in creepypasta are written. And like there's like no real nuance. And even like there's like the sequel to Jeff the Killer that's called like Jane the Killer.
Jane the Killer, yeah.
It's so like it's this typical like gender swap of like a main character, but like sort of like girl bossed up. And like there's nothing like inherently like wrong with that. It's just not very well done.
Why can't it be its own original character? Exactly, yeah.
Why can't it be? Yeah.
And here's my take on the issue is that when I've read creepypasta, I have never paid attention to the protagonist themselves. It's the monster that matters. I'd like to see more representation within the monsters.
That's very true. I think horror fans generally tend to be more like queer leaning, just in the sense that it's alternative and like sort of out of the mainstream, and a lot of people, especially myself, tend to identify with the monsters in these things that are like shunned out of society, and it's just like there's a lot of sort of queer followings in the horror spaces, and I think like tying it back eventually, creepypasta is no different, and I think a lot of it, especially in my own experience, and like with its own accessibility and content, and like not only being able to like create the content and read the content, like it attracts a lot of very young LGBT people.
All right.
Who like if they're creating it, like sometimes they don't necessarily know that they can write to their own experience and instead like copy sort of the demographics of the stories that they've read and enjoyed, which is fair. But I think that also just leads to a lack of like actual queer representation in a very queer heavy genre.
Well, the only thing that comes to mind is that would you want that sort of representation in a genre that is primarily about the protagonist dying?
Sure, why not?
Okay.
Like, dying
Cool.
doesn't notate morality, necessarily. And especially, like, even if the protagonists aren't exactly the most beloved characters, I think there's still purpose to put them there. I've read different stories, a lot of them albeit less popular in the fan base, that do deal with like interpersonal relationships and the friendships that spawn between the protagonist and their friends that are going through this like horrific experience. Like Baraska specifically is one that I can think of that has that strong group friendship tie-in. That like you really do care for these characters and want to root for them, even in the face of the horror. Like, and I think that like it wouldn't be harmful to have these different demographics in the genre.
All right.
I think more recently there have been more like queer characters and like those kind of characters in creepypasta. Like in a lot of the more recent ones, it has become like more commonplace. So
That's absolutely probably true.
definitely like it's evolving, you know. Fiction's always changing and evolving, right?
Yeah, and I'm mainly talking from the perspective of somebody who is very, very into it in the like late 2000s and very, very early 2010s. So like
Yes, no, absolutely.
there's very, very little like diversity in the casting in these.
From that like time of creepypasta, definitely yes. You know, sometimes I wonder, like, what is the appeal of horror in general? Is it just that it gets your adrenaline pumping?
Yeah, cathartic like a roller coaster.
There's an aspect of it where it's like, it makes me feel scared, and, like, being scared is an unpleasant feeling. Like, why do I like this? Like, why do I want to feel that?
Because it's not real. It's the same as waking up from a nightmare and you realize, oh man, wow, that didn't happen. Cool.
Right, but is it not more pleasant to just not have the nightmare in the first place? You know, it's
No,
like
because human experiences are inherently based around Schadenfreude, even towards your own past self. You have to have the down before you can have the up. It's like putting your thumb on a spring and letting it bounce back up.
Okay. It's like something I've never inherently been able to like really understand, but I mean, I guess like I can take your word for it because I mean, I do enjoy creepypasta.
Human experiences are all relative. It's the same as like there's this phenomenon where because your eyes can only detect changes in optical stimulation, if you keep your eyes perfectly still, eventually your vision goes completely solid gray because you're not actually detecting any changes in input. Your eyes can only detect changes in input, and I believe, my personal suggestion perhaps, that the same is true of emotions, that in order for the relief to feel greater, the fear before it has to be greater as well. You have to have that bounce back.
Interesting.
It's the delta that matters. The delta, the change, is what matters, not merely the absolute.
Yeah, I never thought of it like that.
If you're reading a scary story and your mood is like, oh man, this is horrifying, and then the story's over, you rise up back to baseline, that rise is greater than just staying flat would be.
Unless it scares you so much that it's like you're terrified the rest of the night.
Yeah, but there's still some appeal to the fact that, oh, it's not real. And even if it's not relief, there's still something entertaining about the actual change in emotion, even if it's only downwards as well.
It makes me wonder then, like, why isn't there, like, why isn't fiction that makes you feel, say, like, angry as popular, you know?
Oh, there absolutely is.
I haven't seen nearly as much. Like, is there even a name for, like, if horror is, like, fiction that scares you, is there a name for horror, for fiction that makes you angry?
Fox News.
Have you never read a romance novel? So much romance novels are about the protagonist being upset, at least, and then relieved, and then upset,
then
and then
horny.
relieved. Well, yes.
But is that like, does it make the reader angry, I guess?
It's meant to evoke a sympathetic emotion. I don't know if I'd say anger, but there's certainly...
It's not as intense as the sense of fear that's cultivated in horror.
What? Yeah, is there something that evokes anger?
Clickbait. Duh.
Clickbait.
Clickbait,
I mean,
yeah.
but like, think about it though. Like, a lot of it is fiction,
That's fair. Yes.
and a lot of it is like mostly stuff to get a rise out of people.
It is strange to me that I hadn't like really formulated it like that before.
Yeah, I think
Cool.
it's simply just about a change in emotion and not just emotion in the absolute.
I think there's also an aspect to people just like gawking at things, and that's sort of like true for the true crime community too.
It's the same with like spicy food. Like spicy food is literally a sensation of pain. And it's like, I shouldn't want to feel pain. Why do I want more of this? You know, it's the same
Right.
kind of like, it kind of is bewildering to me in a way. But yeah, that's interesting. The idea of the change itself actually being the deciding factor that makes it feel positive in the end. With regards to horror being popular amongst like queer spaces, I feel like creepypasta in particular is not even just like with queer spaces. I've just noticed though in my own engagement with creepypasta, like having written a couple and like read several and like engaged with the fandom a little bit here and there. In my experience, I feel like the creepypasta fandom is by far like one of the least gatekeepy, most welcoming communities on the internet that I've encountered. There's none of this like, oh, for it to be creepypasta, you have to do X, Y, or Z thing, or you have to be this or that or the other. None of that like nonsense.
Yeah, there's no minimum requirements to meet. There's no standard format to fill, it's very decentralized in that regard. It would be like gatekeeping YouTube poop.
Right, exactly.
Because it's like, oh, it's not a YouTube poop unless it has these specific references in it.
I feel like I see that in creepypasta like astonishingly less than any other fandom I've encountered on the internet.
I'm going to take a bit of a different tack on this. I don't think that gatekeeping is bad in the absolute. I think that if there is a lack of gatekeeping in the creepypasta community, it shows that they don't find that there is something worth defending from a sale because it is more valuable to bring people in. There is something to be said for, you know, if you gatekeep your fandom, it may inevitably wither and die. On the other hand, gatekeeping can serve to maintain the definition of what the actual thing is, and prevent it from broadening in scope to the point of dilution towards a homogeneity with everything else.
I think it's very contextual, like with the specific fandom, like what the thing in question actually is. Like, I guess I would say there are certain points in specific fandoms where I would say, like, yeah, no, this isn't so much that anymore. But, like, a lot of gatekeepy attitude has nothing to do with, like, stuff not being... It's, like, sort of like the no fun allowed meme.
Okay.
For sure.
Where it's, like, it's not really even about... Like, when I talk about gatekeeping, I don't talk about completely breaking what the actual medium is to begin with. I'm talking about just being, you know, a stick in the mud about it.
Structural rebel, a Pop-Tart is an ARG.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, a Pop-Tart is an ARG, full stop. Hey, it's got 2 of the 3 letters of ARG. A Pop-Targ.
This is the Pop Tropica ARG.
But yeah, so it is very refreshing, though, nonetheless, to see a community on the internet that is so inherently accepting of, like, whatever, like, people want to, like, come. It's like, oh, you want to write a spooky story? Like, yeah, go for it, mate.
It would seem to me that decentralization is the core reason why it is so ungatekept, because it's not just one community, but a genre altogether. This would be like gatekeeping mystery fiction or gatekeeping romance fiction. It doesn't really work the same way as gatekeeping a specific canon. You might have a much easier time gatekeeping what is a Slenderman story and what isn't, than what is a creepypasta fiction in general and what isn't.
Yeah. And you have to think about, like, the source and origination of, like, what creepypasta was. And, like, I think, I mean, pretty much anything can, like, live up to the quality caliber of, like, being like, my name is Sarah, I have no arms, no legs, but I have a gun, and I'm gonna kill you if you don't repost this. Like, like, if you have, like, at least, like, that, then you're probably good.
That's the thing is, like, it's weird how entertaining I find, because most creepypastas really don't scare me anymore, but the thing is, there's, like, a couple of kinds of horror that I find really enjoyable, right? It's like, if a work of horror fiction is scary, I can enjoy it and be, like, genuinely invested in the story. If a work of horror fiction is not scary, but is trying to be scary. Like, you can tell when something is trying to be scary, even if it's not actually scary. If it's trying to be scary, I can still enjoy it and be, like, bemused by it.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's, like, troll pasta, which are intentionally funny, like, badly written creepypastas that are trying to be funny.
The Day of All the Blood.
Yeah, like a parody
Yes.
of, like, the rest of the stuff that's there.
I'm generally not really a horror fan, but I can appreciate scary stories. What I don't get is stories that are gory and not scary.
Yeah, it's sort of like the torture type thing,
Oh,
which
yeah.
is very
Yeah,
popular and like
Shock value fiction.
prevalent horror.
Blood and gore type of stuff is not a substitute for actual horror.
No.
Yeah. There's a distinction between horror and violence. And violence is the fulfillment of horror, in a sense. Mm-hmm. You would have horror be based on sustaining the unknown, but violence is just very carnal and mundane by comparison.
It's a effective way to get a rise out of someone, especially if they haven't read creepypasta for the first time or, like, not super versed in it. It's like the first time you, like, read something like that, like, or at least speaking for myself, I can say the first time I read those kind of, like, viscerally disgusting kind of stories about, like, this carnage kind of stuff, it did actually, like, really freak me out. I did find it scary. But yeah, it does very quickly become, like, an old trick and, like, gimmicky.
It rots like meat.
It works if it's the first one like this you've read, and then everything else is like passe.
Yes, exactly. So I understand, like, why, you know, it's like clickbait or something. Like, the first time you see something that's clickbait, like, you might have that thought of, like, oh, is it real? But then you, like, sort of wise up very quickly and learn to not trust every clickbaity thing you see on the internet.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, I want to mention, back to the creepypasta narrators, a lot of them will accompany their narrations with music, and specifically, there's one German composer on YouTube named MYUU, MYUU, who makes this very fantastic, haunting music that has, in a lot of ways, become synonymous with the creepypasta community.
In fact, you've probably heard it earlier in this episode.
Oh, no!
Soy Pog.
Yeah, he's a fantastic composer, though. His music really does set the mood for not just horror. I feel like his music sets the mood specifically for creepypasta stories, especially.
Yeah.
With, like, the kind of plot beats they have and kind of tropes they do.
The Kevin MacLeod of horror.
Yes, he weirdly has a song for, like, sort of every kind of horror scenario you could imagine.
And I believe they're very, like, accessible without DMCA. So,
Oh yeah,
like,
absolutely. Yes, as long as you credit him. He's like Kevin MacLeod in that sense too. You can use his music as long as you credit him.
Yeah, exactly, which, like, makes it, like, perfect because, as we know, YouTube is very particular about music choice and a constant DMCA takedowns. Very cool dude. Very, like, insanely talented composer. And, like, it's very cool that he's gotten, like, so popular within the genre that it has become a little bit synonymous. I'm sure there's, like, pros and cons of that. But, like, overall, I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it would be interesting to hear his thoughts on, like, being used so much in creepypasta. So as far as, like, what is the future of creepypasta, like, because very clearly it's not going anywhere. So I want to talk about how it has evolved in recent years.
Yep.
There's a couple of genres that came up in recent years that rose in popularity. One of them, which we mentioned, is analog horror. And then there's also liminal spaces and, like, the back rooms, which I feel like is its own sort of genre, like, maybe not necessarily directly derivative of creepypasta, but certainly, like, relating to in a lot of ways. And both of those, you know, certainly deserve their own fully fledged episodes. But analog horror, in short, is like media that is created with the intention of looking sort of old and archaic, like old VHS recordings of news broadcasts.
Yeah, like, very believable, very stories.
Yes.
Yes.
With the subject matter being, like, news broadcasts about, like, these creepy or scary things happening.
Like the Orson Welles broadcast of War in the Worlds or something.
Exactly like that. Yes.
Yeah, the intent is that the difficulty of replicating or producing analog media in the digital age is more likely to lend it an air of credibility, precisely because of the effort the effort you'd have to put in to get an actual VHS camcorder and record this whole thing makes it more likely to be true in the mind of the viewer. Because these days it's harder to fake this stuff using digital stuff. Well, it's easy to fake with digital, but it's hard to get it right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Markiplier actually made a surprisingly good, like, 30-minute video essay about analog horror that I would recommend. But yeah, like, definitely I think that's the whole point, is that it being, like, at least appearing to be of an archaic medium adds an air of believability to it.
Yep. It's got the same sort of appeal as if an ARG were to involve news clippings.
Right.
The other one you mentioned was liminal spaces, right?
Liminal spaces, and in particular, the Backrooms. The Backrooms is like a very short, like 1 paragraph long horror story that was posted to 4chan, I believe, originally.
Well, it's specifically associated with a very specific photo of an abandoned office building. Do you have a definition of a liminal space? Because my definition, or the one that I've seen used most often, is it is a space between two other spaces, somewhere that people wouldn't normally stay, but you're just passing through. And it's supposed to be inhabited, but it's not. It is a place that is meant to have people in it, going from one place to another, but there's a suspicious lack of human activity, and that is itself the creepy factor. A hotel hallway without windows. There's a famous photo of the underground hotel rooms at Heathrow Airport, which has this interior courtyard with a roof over it. It's very iconic. There is, an abandoned bookstore where they have the words "The End" put up on the wall. There is a lot of indoor pools that have strange architecture and weird abandoned barracks and bunkers, places generally that are suspiciously and noticeably lacking in human activity when they should have people in them. That is a large component of the idea of the liminal space, is that you are alone here, that there is something wrong with the fact that you're the only one here.
Yes, because it's like the thing is you get so used to these liminal space photos are all like places that you are normally comfortable and have the usual context of experiencing in a context where they are inhabited by several people and filled with life. Right, and so it's a very different kind of atmosphere when it's just like an empty grocery store or an empty mall or something, right?
Or, yeah, like an office building with like nothing in it.
Right, there's a very different atmosphere. It sort of lends itself to this like kind of uncanny valley of like being between reality and surreality, where it's like you recognize it, but it's in an unfamiliar context.
Yeah, its contextual references have been removed. It's a sort of, humans have always been cavemen. We never really stopped being cavemen. We just started building our own caves. And seeing one devoid of decoration, it adds a sort of ambiguity that you can't really place.
And so the Backrooms is like a specific liminal space photograph that alludes to this plane of existence that's like literally tens of thousands of square miles large and has like monsters roaming around it.
I think putting the specific numbers to it is stupid, because how is the protagonist going to know that that's the case?
Well, I think having the monsters in it is stupid, because I feel like it's already scary just being in this vast hellscape of nothing, right? Like, why does it need monsters?
That's like the main criticism I've seen of the Backrooms. It's like, why does it need these things?
Yeah, it doesn't need a scary, big, spindly monster. It needs to be a scary place alone. If anything, it is the ideal distillation of a scary place.
Yes, I think liminal space is easily like the biggest sort of evolution that the scary place genre of creepypasta has had.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
There's also an interesting connection to nostalgia with a lot of liminal spaces. Like, a lot of popular liminal space images happen to be like spaces that are like familiar to people in like roughly millennial Gen Z kind of age groups from those like people's childhoods, like places like Pizza Hut arcades, 90s Taco Bell, places like that. Or like empty like elementary school classrooms, right? Like that kind of stuff.
Did you guys hear about the Burger King found behind a wall?
Yes, that's actually near where I live.
Oh, really? You should go there and vlog it.
It's Maybe. That's in, I believe, the Concord Mall in Wilmington, Delaware. But yeah, it's like this Burger King that had been like trapped in time.
Yeah, sealed up in a wall like the cask of Amontillado.
How that, like, how does that even
The
happen?
lights were still on.
Yeah, so there was obviously like power to it, but like, it's so bizarre.
It's amazing. It's like the episode of Community where they found that guy like living in the computer like under this building. But yeah, so there's with this connection with nostalgia, it gives them not just this air of like eeriness, but it also creates this kind of wistful loneliness and like, you know, man, time's foregone.
The same mood that Vaporwave was going for, yeah.
Yeah. Vaporwave and liminal space really go hand in hand, I would say. But yeah, so those are just like a couple of sort of subgenres of internet horror and semi-horror that I feel definitely have some relation to creepypasta. Oh yeah, I wanted to talk about when we mentioned the Slender Man movie and like what a shame it is that, you know, it's being like the rights
Licensed,
are being claimed
yeah.
by a studio and that's like not like a thing for the internet anymore. I wanted to bring up, there was a show on Sci-Fi. I'm not sure if it's still on, but there was a show on Sci-Fi for a while called Channel Zero, which was an anthology series where, you know, where it's like American Horror Story, a different story every season. But the sort of gimmick of it was that each season was based on a different famous creepypasta. And it was like, you know, a whole season of episodes like sort of expanding on that idea and doing its own spin on it. I watched the first two seasons. Season 1 was based on Candle Cove, which is a haunting short story by Chris Straub about like a group of people in a forum who collectively discover that this haunting, scary, messed up kids show they all collectively grew up watching, they all discover collectively that it never actually really existed and they were collectively hallucinating it.
Collectively?
Mandela effect style. I don't think they ever discovered that. I thought it was like one of the main characters talked about how the kid was always watching Static.
Yeah, well, but that it implies then like that they would have that realization.
Okay.
Right. And then season 2 was based on No End House, which is one of my favorite creepypastas. It's a scary place creepypasta about this like house with like an endless amount of rooms that get progressively scarier one after the other. That like you're
Oh my god, the backgrounds.
yeah. And you're offered like a cash prize if you can make it through all the rooms, and it's just this character sort of wandering through them, and the rooms get progressively more and more unnerving and terrifying, and like, you know, to a supernatural extent. But so, you know, it's interesting to see these stories adapted to like, you know, long form, like a season of a TV show. They definitely had to change it up a bit to fit the televised medium. But honestly, I thought it was pretty cool. And, you know, there was nothing like shady about it. They got permission from the original writers of the stories, and they, you know, the writers of these creepypastas did get royalties from the, you know, shows that aired. And so, yeah, but it was definitely interesting to see them try it. And honestly, I enjoyed it quite a lot. I thought it was pretty good.
All right.
There's definitely like ways you can adapt certain creepypasta stories to television or film. And I remember seeing a short film based on the Russian sleep experiment as well, for example, that was also like pretty good.
Ah.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of peripheral and ancillary adaptations of the backrooms to a variety of visual media. I have to highly recommend Kane Pixel's work, Kane Pixel. He is, at the time he made the first backrooms video, I think he was only like 16. And he's showing a lot of promise. I would recommend his backrooms work.
It's
Yes.
amazing.
That one guy can do that. It's amazing that one guy can do that. If you dropped if you took the video he did and put it on like MTV in like 2002, people would think, "Whoa, this is like a 100-person production."
Yeah.
Sort of in that similar vein, I think a lot of the future of creepypastas probably in gaming.
Absolutely.
Since a lot of these stories tend to really translate well to interactive like game media.
Yep.
And
A first-person experience.
yeah, first person experience, like, and even nowadays it's far more accessible than say in like the early 2010s to create your own video game. Like, there are plenty of options now that go past just like singular creative writing, and you can like go on and create the visuals you want to see instead of like describing them as hyper realistic blood in a in a Sonic game.
Yeah.
And and we obviously we've seen it with video games like Slender and even like Petscop, which isn't technically a video game, but it has like the visual elements to where it definitely could have been. And obviously with like the Siren Head stuff that is going on currently too.
The early Siren Head game, which was made for a PS1 emulation contest, was brilliant, and it was succinct, and it was a really well crafted, concise experience. Like, you get what you need to know out of the game.
Yeah, I think like a lot of this genre could benefit and is probably inevitably going to lean towards these more interactive methods of storytelling.
Exactly. Think how many early YouTubers got their start on horror video games like Amnesia.
Yes, exactly.
A lot of which benefits, from screaming over reactions, but a lot of which also benefits from just playing through a horror story tends to fit well with horror as a genre.
Oh, absolutely. Wow, it really came full circle, my comparison to Let's Players with Creepypasta. It's like,
that's going to be the future of it again, because that's the way the genre works best.
It really does go hand in hand. The genre really does lend itself well to Let's Players.
Well, horror will always need a reaction, right?
Markiplier absolutely first got famous. I was there before he was like really popular, and it was all like horror games he did mostly.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the big names are like that as well.
PewDiePie too, stuff like that.
Yeah, Jacksepticeye. I definitely believe that the future of horror in general, and the future of creepypasta in particular, although it's losing the sort of pasta, pasted back and forth elements, it's going to be in interactive media, it's going to be in mixed media, it's definitely going to be involving video games to a much greater extent. I could absolutely imagine a horror video game which branches out into peripheral surrounding media, such that you have multiple games interacting with each other. Sometimes I've thought about the concept of, a multiplayer game where different players are playing different genres. Like, you have your mom playing a Farmville type game, but some of the crops she farms in the game goes to your soldiers in your strategy game or something.
I love that.
So why not do that for horror alone? I think that there's fertile ground to be tilled there.
For sure.
Ooh, the next Rusty Lake game is going to be like that. The Past Within. Rusty Lake is a series which I think, again, warrants its own episode, but the upcoming one this year is a two-player game, like point-and-click escape type game, where one player plays the role of a character in the future, and another character plays the role of a character in the past, and they each sort of have different mechanics on their own screen, but they're, like, interconnected, so, like, that someone...
So they're in the same space, but the past character's actions influence what the future character sees?
Yes, or something of that nature.
It does remind me of a game idea I had involving an archaeologist going through a temple. And so one player or the past character or whatever would be designing the puzzles, and then the future character would be solving them.
Right. In this game in particular, I think in the trailer, it was like, it causes stuff to effectively happen in real time, like, for both of them.
Huh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah, it looks very fascinating. Definitely, though, that would be really cool to see more of that kind of stuff.
Yes. Mixed media, mixed genre participation, and even just mixed media interactive games for horror, I think, there's more room for it to grow.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, I look forward to seeing how it grows. I mean, I've, always very much enjoyed creepypasta, for better and for worse, All right, so stay safe out there, guys. Don't let any skeletons pop out at you. And thank you, Peter and Izzy, for joining me.
I was the skeleton the whole time.
The true horrors are among you all along.
Among us?
Among
Sus?
us? Among us. Thank you.
It turns out the friends reel were the maid we hoard along the way.
Oh.
So, you're with your honey,
and you're making out when the phone rings. You answer it, and the voice is, "What are you doing with my daughter?" You tell your girl, and she says, "My dad is dead." Then who was phone? Oh, I almost forgot. Before we go, let's consult the Cheese Oracle, a segment where we slap a slice of Swiss on our notes and reveal the hidden moral of the episode. Today's adage reads, "Twist bad, bad analog gate." And perhaps this means relying on subversion of the reader's expectations, or overuse of iconography. Create more frustration than bolster the quality of a work. But I'll let you be the judge of that. Back to you, Bela.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Fictron. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the Fictron YouTube channel. Also check out the official Fictron website at altficportal.wixsite.com/Fictron. That's altficportal.wixsite.com/Fictron. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at altficportal. You can reach me on Twitter at serrated_M, IZZY at Tombstone, and PDB at peterdanielberg.com. Links and relevant media will be in the description. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time. You like anime?